Please, officer, you don't understand. She's going to die if I don't get there in the next 4 minutes. Dr. Isaiah Morgan's hands trembled against the steering wheel as red and blue lights painted his dashboard in alternating chaos. The speedometer had hit 90 on Mercy General's approach road. And now this. Handcuffs clicking around his wrists while somewhere inside that hospital, a trauma patient bled out on an operating table. Save it for the judge. Officer Daniel Reed's voice cut through the night air like broken glass. You people think you can talk your way out of anything. Isaiah's heart hammered against his ribs. The call from Dr. Levin had been crystal clear. Massive internal bleeding, grade 5 splenic laceration, patient crashing fast. He was the only trauma surgeon on call within 50 miles. Every second he spent pressed against this police cruiser meant another heartbeat the patient might not get back. Look at my ID, Isaiah pleaded, his voice cracking. I'm a surgeon at Mercy General. There's a woman dying right now who needs. Yeah, and I'm the Pope. Reed's laugh held no humor. Fancy car, expensive watch, driving like you own the road. Let me guess, you're late for a golf game. The radio crackled from Reed's shoulder. All units, we have a code blue trauma situation at Mercy General. Patient in critical condition, requesting immediate backup for crowd control. Family members becoming increasingly agitated. Isaiah's breath caught. That's her. That's my patient. Please, I'm begging you, call the hospital. Ask for Dr. Levin in trauma. She'll confirm everything. But Reed had already turned away, pulling out his citation book. Through the hospital's glass doors, Isaiah could see the frantic movement of medical staff. Someone in scrubs burst through the entrance, scanning the parking lot desperately. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Reed's radio crackled again. Officer Reed, please respond. We have a situation developing at Mercy General. The family is demanding to know where the surgeon is. Repeat, where is the trauma surgeon? Not my problem, Reed muttered, but something in his voice had shifted. His pen hovered over the citation. Isaiah pressed against the car window. What's the patient's name? The trauma patient. What's her name? Like I would tell you that. But Reed's hand moved instinctively toward his radio. His wedding ring caught the streetlight. The hospital doors burst open again. A nurse in bloodstained scrubs ran toward them, her face a mask of pure panic. Dr. Morgan. Thank God, we've been looking everywhere. She's crashing. We need you now. Reed's citation book slipped from his fingers. Wait, he said slowly, his voice suddenly hollow. What did you say the patient's name was? The nurse's eyes darted between them. Emma Reed. Car accident on Highway 9. Her husband's a police officer. He doesn't even know yet. We can't reach him. The color drained from Reed's face like water through broken glass. Isaiah watched the officer's world shatter in real time. The same hands that had cuffed him now fumbled for the keys, shaking so violently they couldn't find the lock. How long? Reed whispered. How long what? Isaiah asked. How long has she been waiting for you? The handcuffs hit the asphalt with a metallic clatter that echoed through the emergency bay like a death knell. Move, Reed commanded, but his voice had transformed from authority to desperation. How much time does she have? Isaiah rubbed circulation back into his wrists, his mind already shifting into surgical mode. Internal bleeding this severe? Maybe 10 minutes before we lose her completely. They sprinted toward Mercy General's trauma entrance, Reed's boots pounding against concrete beside Isaiah's dress shoes. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. 30 seconds ago, Reed had been convinced Isaiah was just another entitled criminal. Now he was the only thing standing between Reed and widowhood. Dr. Morgan. Dr. Levin burst through the automatic doors, her surgical cap askew. Thank God. She's in her 3, but we're losing her fast. BP dropping, pulse thready. Where have you been? Reed stepped forward, his badge catching the fluorescent light. That's on me. I detained Dr. Morgan. Levin's eyes widened in recognition. Officer Reed? You're Emma's husband. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She's been asking for you. The words hit Reed like a physical blow. Isaiah watched the officer's face cycle through emotions, love, terror, guilt, rage, all in the space of a heartbeat. This was what vulnerability looked like when stripped of all pretense. Can I see her? Reed's voice cracked like a teenager's. After surgery, Isaiah said firmly, already moving toward the elevator. Right now, she needs me more than she needs you. It was the wrong thing to say. Reed's hand shot out, grabbing Isaiah's arm with surprising gentleness, the touch of a man drowning, not attacking. "Please," Reed whispered. "I know what I did was wrong. His voice broke completely. She's everything to me. Everything. And if she dies because I was too stupid to listen." Isaiah stopped. In Reed's eyes, he saw something achingly familiar. The same desperate love he'd felt watching his own mother slip away in a hospital bed while doctors dismissed his teenage pleas for help. The same helplessness that had driven him to become a surgeon in the first place. "She won't die," Isaiah said quietly. "Not on my watch." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, but before they could step inside, Sergeant Alexander appeared around the corner, his expression thunderous. "Reed, what the hell are you doing? I've got 3 calls about you detaining a suspect without cause. And now you're fraternizing with him." Isaiah felt Reed tense beside him. The Brotherhood of Blue was watching, judging. Everything Reed had built his career on suddenly stood in direct opposition to saving his wife's life. "Sarge, this is Dr. Morgan. He's about to operate on Emma." Alexander, eyes narrowed as he took in Isaiah's expensive clothes, his confident bearing. "Right. And I'm sure this has nothing to do with the fact that you just cost the department a lawsuit for racial profiling." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Isaiah saw Reed's face flush with shame and anger. Not at Alexander, but at the truth he couldn't deny. "That's not," Reed started. "Save it," Alexander cut him off. "You think this doctor's going to do his best work knowing you just humiliated him in public? You think he's not human?" Alexander stepped closer to Isaiah, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Hell, I wouldn't blame him if he wasn't feeling particularly motivated right now." Isaiah's blood turned to ice. The implication was clear. Alexander was planting seeds of doubt about Isaiah's professional integrity, suggesting he might let personal grievance affect his surgical judgment. It was a betrayal of everything Isaiah stood for. But worse, it was designed to destroy Reed's faith in the only person who could save his wife. "You son of a bitch," Reed breathed, but Alexander was already walking away. "Think about it, Reed. Ask yourself what you'd do in his shoes." The elevator doors started to close, but Isaiah caught them, his mind racing. Every second of delay could cost Emma Reed her life, but Alexander had just weaponized race and authority in the most insidious way possible. Now Reed would spend the entire surgery wondering if Isaiah was letting his wife die out of spite. Isaiah turned to face Reed directly, seeing the doubt already beginning to creep into the officer's eyes. "Let me make something crystal clear," Isaiah said, his voice steady as steel. "I've spent 12 years saving lives. I've operated on Klansmen who called me racial slurs while I sewed up their hearts. I've saved the children of judges who sentenced my friends to prison for crimes they didn't commit. And tonight, I'm going to save your wife not because you deserve it, but because she does." Reed's breathing had become shallow, rapid. "What if you can't? What if the delay I caused? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But right now, your wife needs you to trust me. Can you do that?" The elevator began its ascent, carrying them toward the operating theater where Emma Reed fought for each breath. But Isaiah could see the poison Alexander had planted taking root. Reed's hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight with the effort of containing emotions he couldn't name. "I need to know," Reed said quietly as they reached the surgical floor. "If she dies, will it be because of what I did to you?" Isaiah looked at this man, this flawed, frightened human being who had humiliated him and could just as easily destroy his career with a false report, and felt something shift inside his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. They were both products of a system designed to turn them against each other, both trapped by expectations that demanded they be something less than human. "Officer Reed," Isaiah said as the elevator doors opened onto the bright hallway leading to 3. "The only thing that's going to kill your wife is time. And we've already wasted too much of it." But even as they rushed toward the operating room, Isaiah could feel the weight of Alexander's words settling over them like a curse. Trust, once fractured, didn't heal easily. And in the hours ahead, both men would discover that sometimes saving a life required destroying everything you thought you knew about justice, mercy, and the price of being wrong. The operating room doors swung open, revealing Emma Reed's unconscious form surrounded by machines that beeped out the irregular rhythm of a failing heart. And Isaiah realized that the real surgery was just beginning. The first thing Isaiah noticed when he entered 3 was the blood. Too much blood. Emma Reed's abdomen was distended, her skin the color of old parchment, and the monitors painted a stark picture of a body in full revolt. "Talk to me," Isaiah commanded, scrubbing in with practiced efficiency while his surgical team prepared the instruments. 26-year-old female, multi-vehicle collision on Highway 9. Dr. Levin rattled off the stats like a prayer she'd memorized. Massive internal bleeding, possible splenic laceration, possible liver damage. We've pumped 4 units into her, and she's still dropping. BP is 60/40 and falling. Isaiah's hands stilled for just a moment. Highway 9. That was the same road where Reed had pulled him over. The road that led directly away from Mercy General toward the poorer side of town where Isaiah had grown up. What had Emma Reed been doing there at 11 at night? How long since the accident? He asked, sliding his hands into surgical gloves. 47 minutes, Levin replied. Paramedics said she was conscious at the scene, kept asking them to call her husband. Through the observation window, Isaiah could see Reed pacing the hallway like a caged animal. His uniform was disheveled, his face a map of barely contained panic. Every few seconds, he'd stop and press his palms against the glass, trying to will his wife back to consciousness through sheer force of love. Dr. Morgan, the anesthesiologist, called out softly. We've got a problem. Her blood pressure just dropped to 50/30. If we don't get control of this bleeding in the next few minutes. Isaiah didn't need her to finish the sentence. He'd seen this scenario before, too many times. The golden hour had already passed. Every minute of delay had cost Emma Reed blood she couldn't spare, and now they were operating in the red zone where even perfect surgery might not be enough. Scalpel. The first incision revealed the extent of the damage. Emma's spleen had been virtually destroyed in the impact, and her liver showed signs of significant trauma. But it was what Isaiah found next that stopped his heart cold. Levin, look at this. His voice was barely above a whisper. Embedded in Emma's abdomen, partially obscured by blood and tissue, was a piece of twisted metal. But this wasn't random crash debris. Isaiah had seen enough trauma cases to recognize deliberate damage when he saw it. This wasn't an accident, he breathed. Levin leaned closer, her eyes widening behind her surgical mask. Are you saying? I'm saying this woman was stabbed before she ever got in that car. The revelation hit the operating room like a shock wave. Emma Reed hadn't been driving erratically because she was drunk or distracted. She'd been fleeing for her life, bleeding internally, trying to reach the hospital before she collapsed. Isaiah's mind raced as he worked to control the bleeding. Who had attacked Emma Reed? And why had she been on that particular road? The road that led away from her comfortable suburban neighborhood toward the part of town where people like Isaiah grew up. Should we tell Officer Reed? Levin asked quietly. Isaiah glanced toward the observation window where Reed continued his vigil. The man was already destroyed by guilt over detaining the surgeon. How would he handle learning that his wife had been the victim of a violent crime while he was writing traffic tickets? Not yet, Isaiah decided. Let's save her life first. Then we'll worry about who tried to take it. But even as he spoke, Isaiah felt the weight of another secret settling on his shoulders. Because there was something else he'd noticed about the metal fragment. Something that made his hands shake as he carefully extracted it from Emma's body. The blade bore a distinctive marking, a small cross etched into the handle that Isaiah recognized from his own troubled youth. It was the signature of the Riverside Gang, the same crew that had terrorized his neighborhood for years before Isaiah escaped through medical school. Emma Reed hadn't just been randomly attacked. She'd been targeted by people Isaiah knew, people from his old life who might have very good reasons for wanting to hurt the wife of a police officer. Doctor? Levin's voice cut through his thoughts. Her pressure stabilizing, but we need to make a decision about the spleen. Remove it or try to repair. Isaiah forced himself to focus on the surgery, but his mind kept circling back to the implications. If Emma had been targeted because of her husband's police work, then Reed wasn't just a grieving spouse. He was potentially in danger himself. And if the Riverside Gang was involved, then Isaiah's presence here wasn't just professional courtesy. It was personal. Repair, he decided. She's young and healthy. Give her every chance at a normal life. As he worked to reconstruct Emma's damaged spleen, Isaiah became aware of a commotion building outside the OR. Through the observation window, he could see Reed arguing with someone, a tall man in an expensive suit who looked completely out of place in the hospital setting. Who's that? Isaiah asked Levin. She glanced up from her instruments. I don't know, but he's been asking a lot of questions about Emma's condition. Claims to be family, but Reed doesn't seem to know him. Isaiah's blood chilled. In his experience, people who showed up at hospitals asking questions usually weren't there for good reasons. especially not when the patient had been the victim of attempted murder. The suit-wearing man was now gesturing animatedly, his face red with apparent anger. Reed was shaking his head, his hand moving instinctively toward his service weapon. Whatever they were discussing, it was escalating quickly. "Levin, can you finish the closure?" Isaiah asked suddenly. "Of course, but why?" "Because I think Officer Reed is about to learn that tonight was never about a traffic stop. And he's going to need backup." Isaiah stripped off his surgical gloves and stepped toward the door, his heart hammering with the realization that saving Emma Reed's life might have been the easy part. Outside in that hallway, Reed was facing down someone who clearly had an agenda. And if Isaiah was right about the gang connection, that agenda involved making sure Emma never woke up to identify her attacker. The point of no return had arrived. Isaiah could walk away, declare the surgery successful, and let Reed handle whatever family drama was unfolding outside. Or he could step into a situation that might cost him everything he'd worked for, but could save both Emma and Reed from dangers they couldn't even see coming. The man in the suit was now pointing directly at the operating room, his voice rising loud enough to be heard through the glass. "I don't care what you think you know, officer. That woman has information that doesn't belong to her, and there are people who will kill to get it back." Isaiah's hand froze on the door handle as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about gang revenge or random violence. Emma Reed had somehow gotten involved with something much bigger and more dangerous than street crime. And now her husband was standing face to face with someone who clearly had the resources and motivation to finish what the attack on Highway 9 had started. Isaiah burst through the operating room doors just as the man in the suit grabbed Reed's arm with surprising force. "Get your hands off me," Reed snarled, but there was something different in his voice, not just anger but recognition. Fear. "Officer Reed, step away from this man." Isaiah's command cut through the tension like a surgical blade. "Hospital security is already on the way." The suited man's eyes flicked to Isaiah, and in that moment, Isaiah saw something that made his blood freeze. This wasn't some random criminal or desperate family member. This man carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned institutions, who bought silence with more than just money. "Dr. Morgan, I presume," the man said smoothly, releasing Reed's arm. "Detective Donald Cooper, Internal Affairs. I'm here about Mrs. Reed's situation." Reed's face went ashen. "Aye, what the hell does Internal Affairs want with Emma?" Cooper smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Your wife has been asking some very interesting questions lately, Officer Reed. Questions about certain discrepancies in evidence logs. Questions about why drug busts keep resulting in mysteriously small recoveries." Isaiah felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Emma Reed wasn't just a police officer's wife. She worked somewhere in the system, somewhere she'd have access to information that could expose corruption. And now someone wanted that information back, along with her silence. Permanently. "Emma works in the evidence department," Reed said slowly, his voice hollow with dawning realization. She mentioned some irregularities in the drug seizure reports." "Irregularities?" Cooper repeated, his voice dripping with false concern. "Yes, that's one way to put it. Another way would be to say she's been sticking her nose where it doesn't belong." Through the operating room window, Isaiah could see Levin still working frantically over Emma's unconscious form. The monitors showed stable but critical vital signs. She was alive, but barely. And now it was becoming clear that keeping her alive might be more dangerous than anyone realized. "How do I know you're really Internal Affairs?" Reed demanded, his hand moving toward his service weapon. Cooper's laugh was soft and cold. "Because if I wasn't Officer Reed, this conversation would have ended very differently. Your wife discovered some sensitive information during a routine audit. Information that certain people need returned." "What kind of information?" Isaiah asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Cooper's eyes locked onto Isaiah with predatory focus. "The kind that could destroy careers. End pensions. Send people to prison." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The kind that could get her killed if it falls into the wrong hands." The hallway suddenly felt claustrophobic, like the walls were closing in. Isaiah realized they were trapped, not just physically in this hospital corridor, but in a web of corruption that reached deeper than either of them had imagined. "She doesn't have anything," Reed said desperately. "Emma's just a clerk. She processes evidence, files reports. She doesn't have access to." "She has copies," Cooper interrupted. "Digital files. Financial records. Names, dates, amounts. Everything needed to bring down a very profitable operation that's been running for 5 years. Isaiah's mind raced. Emma Reed had somehow stumbled onto a police corruption ring, probably involving drug evidence tampering and theft. She'd made copies of incriminating documents, which meant she'd planned to expose it. But someone had discovered her investigation before she could act on it. The attack wasn't random, Isaiah said. Someone tried to kill her to get those files. Cooper's smile widened. Very good, Doctor. Though I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation. Reed's face had gone white. You son of a bitch. You tried to murder my wife. I didn't try anything, Officer Reed. But I represent people who are very motivated to resolve this situation quietly. People who have significant resources and very few moral constraints. Isaiah could see the monitors in the or beginning to fluctuate. Emma's blood pressure was dropping again. Her body was rejecting the trauma of surgery combined with blood loss. If she didn't stabilize soon, all of this would be academic. She'd be dead, and the corruption would continue. What do you want? Reed asked through gritted teeth. The flash drive, Cooper said simply. Emma hid it somewhere before the attack. We've searched your house, your car, her office. It's not in any of the obvious places. Isaiah felt a chill of realization. That's why you're here. You think she might have told her husband where she hid the evidence. Clever doctor. Yes, that's exactly what I think. And Officer Reed is going to tell me everything his wife shared with him about her little investigation. Reed's face cycled through emotions, confusion, anger, and then something that looked like heartbreak. She didn't tell me anything. I work traffic patrol. Emma never talks about her job. I find that hard to believe, Cooper said, stepping closer. Married couples share things. Pillow talk. Casual conversations over dinner. Surely she mentioned something about her concerns. But Isaiah could see the truth in Reed's eyes. Emma had kept her investigation secret from her own husband, probably to protect him. Which meant Reed genuinely didn't know where the evidence was hidden. Which also meant Cooper would soon realize that Reed was useless to him. The monitors in the OR began beeping more urgently. Through the window, Isaiah could see Levin making frantic gestures toward the door. I need to get back in there, Isaiah said. She's crashing. No, Cooper said firmly. You're going to stay right here until Officer Reed remembers what his wife told him. She could die if I don't. She's going to die anyway, Cooper interrupted, his mask finally slipping completely. The only question is whether it happens on that operating table or somewhere more private. And that decision depends entirely on how cooperative her husband decides to be. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Cooper was no longer pretending to be the good guy. He was openly threatening to murder Emma Reed if he didn't get what he wanted. And Isaiah realized with growing horror that Reed was about to discover the same truth he'd learned years ago. Sometimes the people sworn to protect you were the ones you needed protection from. Reed's radio crackled to life. All units, be advised we have reports of a break-in at 1247 Oakwood Drive. Homeowner reports extensive property damage, but no items apparently stolen. Cooper smiled. That would be your house, Officer Reed. My associates are being very thorough in their search. Reed's hand moved to his weapon. You bastards destroyed our home? And we'll do worse if necessary. The only way this ends well for anyone is if you remember what your wife told you about her investigation. But Isaiah could see something Cooper couldn't. Through the operating room window, Emma Reed's eyes had fluttered open. She was conscious, weak but aware. And she was looking directly at her husband through the glass. Her lips moved soundlessly, but Isaiah could read the words. Don't tell him anything. Emma Reed was awake, alive, and still fighting to protect the evidence that could bring down the corruption ring. Which meant the real battle was just beginning. Emma Reed's lips moved again, more urgently this time, and Isaiah saw Reed's face change from confusion to something far worse. Recognition mixed with absolute terror. No, Reed whispered, so quietly that only Isaiah heard him. Emma, don't. But Cooper had seen the movement too. His eyes snapped to the operating room window, where Emma was struggling to sit up despite the tubes and monitors surrounding her. Well, well, Cooper said, his voice filled with cold satisfaction. Sleeping Beauty awakens. This should make things much more interesting. Reed stepped toward the window, pressing his palm against the glass. Emma, stay still. You need to rest. But Emma's eyes were locked on her husband's face, and Isaiah could see her lips forming words again. This time, he caught them clearly. I know what you did. The color drained from Reed's face like spilled water. Cooper's laugh filled the corridor like broken glass. Oh, this is beautiful. She hasn't told him yet, has she? Officer Reed doesn't know that his loving wife discovered his little side business. Isaiah felt the world shift beneath his feet. What are you talking about? Ask him, Cooper said, gesturing toward Reed. Ask him how a traffic cop affords a house in Brookfield Heights on a $40,000 salary. Ask him where the extra money comes from. Reed's silence was answer enough. Isaiah watched as everything he thought he knew about this man crumbled into dust. The guilt in Reed's eyes wasn't just about delaying a surgeon. It was about being caught in a web of lies that his wife had unraveled thread by thread. You're one of them, Isaiah breathed. You're part of the corruption ring. It's not that simple, Reed said desperately. You don't understand. Then explain it, Cooper interrupted, clearly enjoying the moment. Tell the good doctor how you've been supplementing your income by looking the other way during drug busts. Tell him about the evidence that mysteriously disappears from crime scenes. Tell him about the dealers who walk free because Officer Daniel Reed forgot to follow procedure. Through the window, Emma had managed to pull herself up on her elbows. Her face was pale but determined, and Isaiah could see her mouthing something urgently to her husband. Reed's radio crackled again. Unit 47, please respond to domestic disturbance at 1247 Oakwood Drive. Reports of loud argument, possible property damage. Cooper smiled. My associates are getting impatient. They're wondering why the search is taking so long. Isaiah's mind raced as the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Emma Reed hadn't just discovered random police corruption. She'd discovered that her own husband was dirty. The evidence she'd hidden implicated the man she'd married, the father of her children, the person she'd trusted most in the world. How long has she known? Isaiah asked. Reed's voice cracked. 3 weeks. She came home from work asking questions about our finances. About trips we'd taken, things we'd bought. She's smart, too smart. She put it together. And you let her believe you were innocent, Cooper said with mock sympathy. Right up until she found the bank records showing deposits that don't match your legitimate income. Tell me, Officer Reed, how did it feel when your wife realized she'd been sleeping with the enemy? Through the window, Emma was becoming more agitated. The monitors showed her heart rate spiking, blood pressure fluctuating dangerously. She was fighting to stay conscious, fighting to communicate something crucial. She's going to tear her stitches, Isaiah said urgently. I need to sedate her before. Before what? Cooper asked. Before she tells us where she hid the evidence that will destroy her husband's life? I don't think so, Doctor. Reed pressed both hands against the glass now, his forehead touching the window. Emma, please. Just rest. We'll figure this out. But Emma shook her head weakly, her lips moving in a desperate whisper that only Reed could understand. Isaiah watched the officer's face cycle through emotions. Love, guilt, desperation, and finally, a kind of broken acceptance. She's trying to protect me, Reed said quietly. Even now, knowing what I've done, she's trying to protect me. The devastation in his voice was complete. Here was a man watching his wife fight for her life after being attacked because of his crimes, and she was still trying to shield him from the consequences. How touching, Cooper said. But protection is a luxury she can't afford. The people I represent have invested significant resources in maintaining this operation. Your wife threatens that investment. What people? Isaiah demanded. Who's really behind this? Cooper's smile widened. The same people who've been running drugs through Mercy General's supply chain for the past 2 years. The same people who needed someone with medical credentials to help them process their product without detection. Isaiah's blood turned to ice. What are you saying? I'm saying this hospital isn't as clean as you think, Doctor. And neither are some of its staff members. The implication hit Isaiah like a physical blow. The corruption didn't just involve police officers skimming drug evidence. It involved medical personnel using hospital resources to process and distribute drugs. And Cooper was suggesting that someone at Mercy General was part of it. You're lying, Isaiah said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Ask yourself why Emma Reed was on that road tonight. What was she doing in that neighborhood at 11 p.m.? She wasn't just running from her attacker, Doctor. She was running to someone she thought she could trust. The world tilted on its axis. Emma hadn't been randomly attacked on Highway 9. She'd been coming to see someone she believed could help her expose the corruption. Someone at the hospital. Someone who might have betrayed her instead. She was coming to see you, Cooper said softly. Wasn't she, Doctor? She'd figured out that her husband was dirty, but she needed medical records to prove the connection between the police corruption and the hospital's supply chain. She needed someone with access to pharmaceutical inventories. Isaiah's hands began to shake. Emma Reed hadn't been a random trauma victim. She'd been coming to him for help when she was attacked. And if Cooper was right about corruption at Mercy General, then someone had known she was coming. Someone had set her up. Through the window, Emma's eyes found Isaiah's face. Her lips moved one more time, and this time he caught every word. Trust no one. The monitors began screaming as Emma's vital signs crashed. But Isaiah couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't process the possibility that he'd spent the last hour saving the life of a woman who'd been betrayed by the very institution he'd devoted his life to serving. Reed was pounding on the glass now, calling his wife's name. Cooper was watching with cold satisfaction. And somewhere in this hospital, someone who knew Emma Reed was coming for help had made sure she never arrived alive. The real question was, who could Isaiah trust when everyone around him might be part of the conspiracy that had nearly killed Emma Reed? Including himself. The monitor's screaming filled the hallway like a siren song of death. Emma's blood pressure was plummeting, her heart rhythm erratic, and through the glass Isaiah could see her consciousness fading again. I need to get in there now, Isaiah said, moving toward the doors. No, Cooper blocked his path. First, we're going to have a conversation about what Mrs. Reed was really doing here tonight. She's dying, Reed shouted, his fist hammering against the window. Whatever game you're playing, she's going to die. But Cooper's attention had shifted to something behind them. Isaiah turned to see Dr. Levin emerging from the OR, her surgical mask pulled down, her face grim. Dr. Morgan, we have a problem. I need to speak with you privately. Cooper's eyes narrowed. Anything you have to say can be said in front of all of us, Doctor. Levin glanced nervously between Cooper and Isaiah. It's about the patient's injuries. There's something you need to know about the weapon that was used. Isaiah felt a chill creep up his spine. What about it? The blade fragments I removed? They contained traces of a paralytic agent. Succinylcholine, specifically. Someone didn't just stab Mrs. Reed. They drugged the weapon to ensure she couldn't fight back. The corridor fell silent except for the distant beeping of monitors. Succinylcholine was a medical-grade paralytic, the kind only available to hospitals and medical professionals. Someone with access to hospital supplies had tried to murder Emma Reed. That's impossible, Isaiah said, but his voice lacked conviction. I ran the tests twice, Levin continued. There's no question. And there's something else. The injection site shows she received the drug intravenously first, then was stabbed. Someone wanted her completely helpless. Cooper's smile was predatory. How very interesting. Tell me, Dr. Levin, who has access to succinylcholine at this hospital. Levin's face went pale. Any doctor, most nurses, anesthesiologists, surgical technicians. And Dr. Morgan? Of course, but what? Cooper pressed. Dr. Morgan was conveniently delayed tonight, wasn't he? What if that delay wasn't accidental? What if someone needed time to clean up after a murder attempt gone wrong? Isaiah's world tilted. You're suggesting I'm not suggesting anything, doctor. I'm stating facts. Mrs. Reed was poisoned with a drug you have access to. She was coming to see you when she was attacked, and you were mysteriously delayed from reaching the hospital. Reed spun around, his hand moving to his weapon. Are you telling me this son of a bitch tried to kill my wife? Daniel, no. Emma's weak voice came through the intercom system. She'd managed to reach the communication button beside her bed. It wasn't him. It was. The intercom went dead with a sharp electronic squeal. System malfunction, Levin said quickly, but Isaiah caught something in her voice, fear, guilt, recognition. Cooper stepped closer to Levin. Doctor, perhaps you'd like to explain to us why you're so eager to defend Dr. Morgan? And why you happen to have those test results ready so quickly? Isaiah watched Levin's face crumble as the truth became impossible to hide. I didn't know she was his wife. I swear I didn't know. The words hit the corridor like grenades. Levin had just confessed to being involved in Emma's attack. You. Reed's voice was barely human. You tried to kill Emma? It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Levin said, tears streaming down her face. Emma Reed came to me 3 days ago with questions about pharmaceutical inventory discrepancies. She'd noticed that our succinylcholine orders were triple what they should be for our surgical volume. Isaiah felt sick. You've been stealing drugs. Not stealing, redistributing. There are people in this city who need pain medication, muscle relaxants, surgical supplies. People who can't afford health care. I was helping them. Cooper laughed coldly. How noble. And how profitable, I'm sure. I never took money, Levin protested. But when Emma started digging deeper, She discovered that someone was using our supplies for other purposes. What other purposes? Reed demanded. Levin's voice broke completely. Manufacturing street drugs. The paralytic agents, when combined with certain stimulants, create a drug that's highly sought after in certain circles. The picture was becoming clear with horrible precision. Levin had been stealing medical supplies, thinking she was helping people. But someone else, someone with connections to the drug trade, had been using her theft to manufacture street drugs. Emma Reed had discovered the entire operation. Who? Isaiah asked. Who was using your stolen supplies? Levin looked at Cooper with naked terror in her eyes. I can't. He'll kill me. He'll kill you anyway, Cooper said pleasantly. The question is whether it happens quickly or slowly. Through your window, Emma was struggling to stay conscious. Her lips were moving, but without the intercom, they couldn't hear her words. Reed pressed against the glass, trying to read her lips. She's saying something about a name, Reed said urgently. She keeps repeating the same word. Isaiah squinted through the window, trying to make out Emma's whispered words. Then he saw it clearly. Alexander. Sergeant Alexander. Reed's own supervisor. The man who'd planted seeds of doubt about Isaiah's surgical motivations. The man who'd known exactly where Reed was tonight, who'd had access to information about the traffic stop. Alexander is behind this, Isaiah breathed. Cooper's expression shifted from amusement to something darker. Sergeant Alexander is a decorated officer with 25 years of service. He's also the one who told you Reed had detained me, Isaiah realized. He's the one who knew Emma would be coming to the hospital tonight. Levin nodded miserably. Alexander has been pressuring me to increase the drug diversions. He said he had buyers who would pay premium prices for pharmaceutical-grade supplies. I thought he meant other hospitals, medical clinics in underserved areas. But he meant drug manufacturers, Reed said, his voice hollow with the realization that his own supervisor had ordered his wife's murder. The monitors in the OR began screaming again. Emma's body was rejecting the trauma, her system shutting down from blood loss and drug interaction. She needed immediate intervention, but Isaiah was trapped in a corridor with a corrupt cop, a terrified doctor, and growing evidence that everyone he trusted was compromised. She's going to die if we don't act now, Isaiah said. Then you'd better hope she doesn't, Cooper replied. Because if Emma Reed dies, there's no one left who can testify about what she discovered. And without her testimony, this entire conversation never happened. The threat was clear. If Emma died, Cooper and Alexander could cover up the entire corruption ring. Levin would disappear, Reed would be framed for his wife's murder, and Isaiah would be left holding responsibility for a patient he'd failed to save. There's one problem with your plan, Reed said quietly, his hand now openly resting on his service weapon. Emma's not the only one who knows the truth. Cooper tilted his head. Oh, I made copies, Reed said, his voice gaining strength. Emma thought she was protecting me by hiding the evidence, but I found her files 3 days ago. Every transaction, every altered report, every missing drug inventory. I copied everything. Isaiah saw Cooper's mask slip completely for the first time. This wasn't part of his plan. Where are the copies? Cooper demanded. Reed smiled grimly. Same place Emma hid hers. Somewhere you'll never find it. But through the window, Emma was shaking her head weakly, her lips forming the word no over and over. She was trying to tell them something, trying to warn them. And Isaiah realized with growing horror that Reed was lying. There were no copies. He was bluffing to buy time, to protect his dying wife from further threats. Which meant if Emma Reed died on that operating table, the truth would die with her. And everyone in that corridor would become expendable. The elevator chimed softly, and Sergeant Alexander stepped into the hallway, his hand already on his weapon. Evening, everyone, Alexander said calmly. I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss. Sergeant Alexander moved down the corridor like death in uniform, his 25 years of authority radiating from every step. Behind him, 2 additional officers flanked the exits, escape routes sealed with practiced efficiency. Dr. Morgan, Alexander said pleasantly, as if they were discussing the weather. I understand you've been having quite an eventful evening. Isaiah's mind raced through rapidly diminishing options. Emma Reed was dying 30 feet away, her vitals continuing to deteriorate on monitors that screamed their warnings into the antiseptic air. Reed stood frozen between his loyalty to his wife and his growing realization that his own supervisor had ordered her execution. Levin cowered against the wall, her earlier confession hanging in the air like a death sentence. And Cooper. Cooper was smiling with the satisfaction of a man whose careful plans were finally coming together. "Sergeant Alexander," Reed said, his voice barely controlled. "Sir, my wife is in critical condition. I need Dr. Morgan to." "Your wife is exactly where she needs to be, Officer Reed." Alexander, interruption carried the weight of absolute authority. "What we need to discuss is how we're going to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." Through the operating room window, Emma's head turned toward the sound of her husband's voice. Even semi-conscious and fighting for her life, she was trying to protect him. Her lips moved in what Isaiah recognized as a desperate plea. "Run." "There's no misunderstanding here," Isaiah said, stepping toward the hors d'oeuvres. "Mrs. Reed needs immediate medical intervention. Everything else can wait." Alexander, hand moved to his service weapon with casual menace. "I'm afraid it can't, Doctor. You see, Mrs. Reed has been making some very serious accusations against decorated officers. Accusations that could destroy careers, ruin families, destabilize an entire precinct. Accusations that are true," Reed said, his own hand moving toward his gun. "Careful, Officer Reed." Alexander's voice carried a warning that made the temperature in the hallway drop 10 degrees. "You're talking about your immediate supervisor. Your pension provider. The man who determines whether you go home safely to your family every night." The threat was clear, but Isaiah could see something breaking inside Reed. The last vestiges of his faith in the system he'd devoted his life to serving. "She found the financial records, didn't she?" Reed asked quietly. Emma discovered how much money has been flowing through the evidence room. She traced the pharmaceutical thefts, connected them to the drug manufacturing, followed the money trail right back to you. Alexander shrugged with the casual indifference of a man who'd been caught, but felt no shame. "Your wife is a very thorough accountant, Officer Reed. Unfortunately, thoroughness can be a dangerous quality in the wrong circumstances." Levin suddenly stepped forward, her terror overridden by medical urgency. "Sergeant, Mrs. Reed's condition is critical. If Dr. Morgan doesn't operate immediately, then she dies," Alexander finished calmly. "Which, from my perspective, solves several problems simultaneously." The casual brutality of the statement hit the corridor like a physical blow. Alexander wasn't just corrupt. He was willing to let Emma Reed die to protect his operation. Isaiah felt something shift inside his chest, a cold fury that overrode his medical training and professional caution. "You son of a bitch. Careful, Doctor. You're in no position to make moral judgments." Alexander smiled. "After all, it was your pharmaceutical expertise that made this entire operation possible." The words hit Isaiah like a sledgehammer. "What are you talking about? Did you really think it was coincidence that Dr. Levin came to you for advice about drug inventory management 6 months ago? Did you assume it was accident that you've been consulted on every major pharmaceutical purchase for the trauma department?" Isaiah's legs felt weak. You never asked where the extra supplies were going," Alexander continued. "You never questioned why trauma surgery suddenly needed triple the normal succinylcholine orders. You signed off on pharmaceutical requests without investigating their ultimate destination." The horrible truth was becoming clear. Isaiah hadn't been an innocent bystander. He'd been an unwitting accomplice. His expertise and authority had been used to legitimize drug thefts that supplied a street manufacturing operation. "I didn't know," Isaiah whispered. "Ignorance isn't innocence, Doctor. Your signatures authorized the thefts that supplied the drugs that nearly killed Mrs. Reed. In a very real sense, you're responsible for her being on that operating table." Reed spun toward Isaiah, his face cycling through betrayal and rage. "You knew? This whole time, you knew what they were doing?" "No," Isaiah said desperately. "I swear, I had no idea." "He's lying," Cooper interjected smoothly. "Dr. Morgan has been receiving consulting fees for his pharmaceutical expertise. $20,000 over the past 6 months, deposited directly into his account." Isaiah's blood turned to ice. Someone had been depositing money in his name, creating a paper trail that implicated him in the corruption. He'd been set up from the beginning, positioned to take the fall if the operation was ever exposed. Through the window, Emma was struggling to sit up, her face pale but determined. She was fighting to stay conscious, fighting to communicate something crucial. "She's trying to tell us something," Reed said, pressing against the glass. Emma's lips moved with desperate urgency, but the intercom remained dead. Then she did something that made everyone in the corridor freeze. She pointed directly at Dr. Levin and shook her head violently. What is she saying? Cooper demanded. Levin stepped closer to the window, her face pale. I don't know. She's delirious from blood loss and medication. But Isaiah caught the gesture Emma made next, a subtle hand movement that he recognized from medical school. Sign language. Emma was spelling something with her fingers. Lir. Emma Reed was pointing at Levin and signing liar. Levin, Isaiah said slowly, the pieces clicking into place with horrible precision. You weren't just stealing drugs randomly, were you? You knew exactly who they were going to. Levin's face crumpled. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. But you knew Emma was coming to see me that night, Isaiah continued. You knew she'd discovered the theft pattern. And you told someone. She gave me no choice. Levin exploded. Emma said she was going to the FBI, going to expose everything. Alexander said if I warned him, he'd make sure I wasn't prosecuted. He said they'd just scare her, make her back off. Reed's hand was now openly on his weapon. You set up my wife to be murdered. I thought they were just going to threaten her. Levin pleaded. I never thought they'd actually. Enough. Alexander's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Dr. Levin, thank you for your service. Unfortunately, you've become a liability. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the enclosed corridor. Levin crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across the white tiles like spilled paint. Reed's weapon was halfway out of its holster when Alexander, gun swung toward him. I wouldn't, Officer Reed. Not unless you want to join your wife in the afterlife. Through the operating room window, Emma had seen her husband's colleague murdered in cold blood. Her vital signs spiked dangerously as shock and terror flooded her system. Isaiah stared at Levin's body, at the blood pooling around her surgical scrubs, and felt his entire worldview collapse. This wasn't about money or drugs or corruption anymore. This was about survival in a system where human life had become expendable. Alexander turned his attention back to Isaiah. Now, doctor, you have a choice to make. You can go into that operating room and save Mrs. Reed's life. But if you do, you'll be saving the only witness who can testify against this operation, which means both of you will have to disappear permanently. Or, Isaiah asked, though he already knew the answer. Or you can step away from those doors and let nature take its course. Mrs. Reed dies from her injuries, the investigation dies with her, and you live to practice medicine another day. The impossible choice hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Save Emma Reed and die with her, or let her die and live with the knowledge that he'd chosen his own survival over a patient's life. Reed looked through the glass at his dying wife, then back at Isaiah. Please, he whispered. Whatever I did wrong, whatever mistakes I made, she doesn't deserve this. She was trying to do the right thing. Isaiah stared into Reed's eyes and saw his own reflection. Two men who'd been manipulated by a system designed to turn them against each other, now facing a moment where all their differences meant nothing compared to the life hanging in the balance. Dr. Morgan, Alexander said conversationally, you have 30 seconds to make your decision. Through the window, Emma Reed's eyes found Isaiah's face one last time. Her lips moved in words he couldn't hear but somehow understood. Save yourself. Even dying, even knowing that her survival meant exposing truths that could destroy lives, Emma Reed was trying to protect the man who might be her last hope. Isaiah looked at the operating room doors, then at Alexander Gunn, then at Reed's desperate face, and realized that some choices weren't about survival. They were about who you decided to be when everything else was stripped away. Isaiah's hand closed around the operating room door handle. I took an oath, Sergeant Alexander. First, do no harm. That means I save every life I can, regardless of the consequences. Even if it costs you your own? Alexander asked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Especially then. Isaiah yanked the door open and stepped into the oar, expecting to feel the bullet tear through his back at any moment. Instead, he heard something that made Alexander curse with sudden, violent rage. Sirens. Multiple sirens, growing louder by the second. What the hell? Alexander spun toward the corridor windows, where red and blue lights were painting the hospital walls in rhythmic patterns. Not one or two patrol cars, but an entire convoy of law enforcement vehicles. Through the operating room intercom, Emma Reed's weak but determined voice filled the corridor. FBI, Internal Affairs, and State Police. I activated the panic button in my evidence room 3 hours ago, right before I left to come here. Isaiah's hands flew to Emma's monitors, checking her vitals as the truth exploded around them. You knew this was going to happen. I knew they'd try to stop me, Emma whispered, her voice gaining strength. So I made sure the cavalry was already on the way. Alexander's face had gone white. You're bluffing. There's no panic button in the evidence room. Emma smiled weakly. There is now. I had it installed 2 weeks ago, right after I discovered the first pharmaceutical discrepancies. Direct line to the FBI's corruption task force. Reed pressed against the glass, his face cycling through amazement and admiration. Emma, you brilliant, stubborn woman. The recording started the moment I pressed that button, Emma continued, each word stronger than the last. Every conversation in this hospital for the past 3 hours has been transmitted directly to federal investigators, including your confession, Sergeant Alexander. Cooper had gone completely still, his confidence evaporating like mist. That's impossible. We swept the hospital for surveillance equipment. You swept for traditional bugs, Emma said. But you didn't check the medical equipment. Every monitor in this hospital can transmit data wirelessly. It just took a little creative reprogramming to send that data somewhere more interesting than the nursing station. Isaiah felt something like awe wash over him as he worked to stabilize Emma's vitals. This woman had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, setting up her own rescue even as she fought for her life. The corridor erupted in chaos as federal agents poured through the stairwell doors. Alexander spun his weapon toward Reed, but the younger officer was already moving, tackling his supervisor with the fury of a man who'd finally found his moral center. You tried to kill my wife. Reed's voice was raw with rage as he pinned Alexander to the floor. You destroyed everything I believed about being a cop. Alexander struggled beneath him. Reed, you don't understand. The money, the operation, it was bigger than just us. We were small players in something massive. Then you should have thought about that before you tried to murder my wife. Federal agents flooded the corridor, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. Through the chaos, Isaiah could see Agent Christine Hawkins, a woman he recognized from news reports about major corruption investigations, directing the operation with military precision. Dr. Morgan, Agent Hawkins called through the intercom. How is Mrs. Reed? Stable but critical, Isaiah replied, his hands never stopping their work. She's lost a lot of blood, but the surgery was successful. She needs immediate transfusion and continued monitoring. And the evidence she gathered? Emma's voice came through the speakers with surprising clarity. Flash drive sewn into the lining of my winter coat. Back bedroom closet, blue coat with the torn pocket. Financial records, pharmaceutical inventories, recorded conversations. Everything you need. Cooper was already in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief. This is impossible. We had every angle covered. You had every male angle covered, Agent Hawkins said with grim satisfaction. You never considered that a woman in the evidence room might be smarter than all of you combined. Through the window, Isaiah could see Alexander being dragged away, his 25 years of authority stripped away in an instant. Other officers were being arrested. The corruption ring was being systematically dismantled in real time. Reed remained pressed against the glass, his eyes locked on his wife's face. Emma, I'm so sorry. About everything. About what I did, what I became. I know, Emma whispered. But Daniel, this is your chance to make it right. The FBI needs someone on the inside, someone who understands how the corruption worked. You want me to testify against my own department? I want you to help rebuild it into something better. Isaiah watched Reed's face transform as he grasped what his wife was offering. Not just forgiveness, but redemption. A chance to turn his participation in corruption into a force for justice. Agent Hawkins's voice cut through the intercom. Officer Reed, we've been monitoring the situation. We know about your involvement in the pharmaceutical thefts. But we also know your wife's investigation started after she discovered your financial irregularities. You have a choice to make. Reed straightened, his hand moving away from his weapon for the first time all night. What kind of choice? Full cooperation with our investigation. Complete testimony about the corruption ring's operations. Help us identify every officer, every medical professional, every dealer involved in this network. And in return, immunity from prosecution. A chance to stay on the force and help us root out the remaining corruption. A chance to make sure what happened to your wife never happens to another family. Reed looked through the window at Emma, who was now sitting up with Isaiah's help. Her color was returning, her vital signs stabilizing. She was going to live. Emma, Reed asked softly. Can you forgive me? I already have, she whispered. But Daniel, you need to forgive yourself. And then you need to make sure this never happens again. Isaiah stepped back as medical technicians arrived to transport Emma to the ICU. His part in the immediate crisis was over, but he realized his real work was just beginning. "Dr. Morgan," Agent Hawkins said, entering the OR. "We're going to need your help too. Your pharmaceutical expertise, your knowledge of hospital systems. There are other institutions where similar operations might be running." Isaiah looked at Emma Reed, who was being carefully transferred to a gurney. Despite everything she'd endured, despite the betrayals and the violence and the corruption that had nearly killed her, she was smiling. "Doctor," she called weakly as they prepared to wheel her away. "Thank you for choosing to save me, even when you thought it might cost you everything." "How did you know I would?" Isaiah asked. Emma's smile widened. "Because 3 hours ago, when I was programming the surveillance system, I hacked into your medical records. I saw every charity surgery you've performed, every patient you've treated without insurance, every time you've chosen someone else's life over your own safety." Isaiah felt tears building in his eyes. "You trusted me based on my medical history? I trusted you based on your character history." And I was right. As Emma was wheeled away, Reed fell into step beside her gurney. The corrupt cop and the woman who'd exposed him, walking together toward whatever came next. Agent Hawkins watched them go, then turned to Isaiah. "Dr. Morgan, what Mrs. Reed did tonight, setting up the surveillance, exposing the corruption, trusting you to save her life, it's going to save dozens of other lives. Maybe hundreds." "How?" "Because this wasn't just about one hospital or one police precinct. This was part of a network spanning 3 states. Mrs. Reed's evidence is going to help us dismantle the entire operation." Isaiah looked around the operating room, at the blood on the floor, at the monitors still beeping their electronic hymns of life and death. A few hours ago, he'd been a surgeon focused on individual patients. Now he was part of something larger, a fight for the integrity of the institutions he'd devoted his life to serving. "Agent Hawkins," he said quietly, "what happens now? Now we get to work, building something better from the ashes of what was broken." Through the window, Isaiah could see the first light of dawn beginning to touch the horizon. Emma Reed was alive. The corruption ring was destroyed. And somehow, in the space of a single night, a traffic stop had become a resurrection. Not just of a patient, but of the possibility that justice and mercy could coexist in a world that had forgotten the difference between right and wrong. 6 months later, Dr. Isaiah Morgan stood in the same emergency bay where everything had started, watching an ambulance pull away with lights flashing. Another successful surgery, another life saved. But everything about how he approached his work had changed. "Dr. Morgan?" The voice belonged to Officer Daniel Reed, but the man wearing the uniform was transformed. Gone was the rigid authoritarianism, replaced by something harder to define. Humility earned through fire, authority tempered by the knowledge of how wrong power could go. "Daniel," Isaiah smiled, no longer surprised by the friendship that had grown from their shared nightmare. "How's Emma?" "Back to terrorizing the evidence room with her audits." Reed laughed, but his voice carried deep affection. "She's implemented tracking systems that make Fort Knox look casual. The FBI has asked her to consult on 3 other investigations." They stood together in comfortable silence. 2 men who had learned that trust wasn't about ignoring differences, but about choosing to see each other's humanity despite them. "I got the letter," Reed said quietly. "About the commendation. Isaiah, I can't tell you what it means that you recommended me for the community policing position." Isaiah shrugged. "You've spent 6 months rebuilding relationships between the police and the communities they serve. You've earned recognition on your own merit." But Reed shook his head. "I earned a chance because you chose to save my wife when you could have walked away. Because you saw something in me worth saving too." The automatic doors whispered open, and Emma Reed emerged, her steps confident despite the faint scar that still marked her abdomen. She moved like someone who had stared death in the face and decided to live more fully, not more carefully. "Dr. Morgan," she called, her voice bright with the particular joy of someone who had survived impossible odds. "Perfect timing. I wanted you to be the first to know." "Know what?" Emma's smile could have lit up the entire hospital. "The pharmaceutical tracking system we developed here is being implemented nationally. 12 major hospital chains with federal oversight. What we went through that night, it's never happening again." Isaiah felt a warmth spread through his chest. The corruption that had nearly killed Emma had been transformed into a force for protecting others. Her suffering hadn't been meaningless. It had become a shield for future patients. "There's more," Reed added, his own smile matching his wife's. "The community health initiative you proposed? Full funding approved. free clinics in underserved neighborhoods, staffed by volunteers, supplied through the legitimate pharmaceutical donation program Emma designed. Isaiah had to lean against the wall. 6 months ago, he'd been unknowingly complicit in a system that diverted medical supplies for profit. Now those same supplies would reach people who genuinely needed them, through channels that couldn't be corrupted or exploited. "I don't know what to say," Isaiah managed. "Say you'll accept the position," Emma replied. "Director of Community Medical Outreach. You'd oversee the entire program, make sure it serves the people who need it most." Isaiah looked between them. The police officer who had arrested him in prejudice and learned to see beyond his assumptions, and the woman who had nearly died exposing corruption, but chose to build something better rather than simply tear down what was broken. "There's one condition," Isaiah said finally. "Officer Reed partners with us on community relations. Police and medical professionals working together, building trust instead of walls." Reed's handshake was firm, carrying the weight of everything they'd survived together. "It would be an honor, Dr. Morgan." "Isaiah," he corrected gently. "Just Isaiah." As Emma and Daniel walked away together, their hands intertwined, Isaiah reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A traffic stop born of prejudice had become a friendship forged in crisis. A corruption scandal that nearly destroyed lives had become a catalyst for systematic reform. A night of violence and betrayal had transformed into a foundation for healing. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Levin's replacement, a young resident who took the pharmaceutical tracking protocols so seriously she double-checked every aspirin distribution. The new systems worked because they'd been designed by people who understood the true cost of failure. Another ambulance pulled into the bay, and Isaiah straightened, ready to do what he'd always done, save lives. But now he did it as part of something larger, something that reached beyond the walls of any single hospital to touch entire communities. The patient was a young black teenager, brought in by 2 police officers who waited anxiously in the corridor. 6 months ago, Isaiah might have wondered if they truly cared about this patient's welfare. Now he saw something different: cops who had learned from Reed's example, medical staff who understood that every person on their table was someone's entire world. As he worked to stabilize the patient, Isaiah could hear the officers talking quietly with the boy's family, offering resources, making connections, building bridges instead of walls. The ripple effects of that terrible night continued to spread, but now they carried healing instead of harm. "Doctor?" The teenager's mother approached hesitantly. Are you Dr. Morgan? The one who saved that police officer's wife?" "I'm Dr. Morgan," Isaiah confirmed. "But I think she saved all of us." The woman's smile was radiant. "My son heard about what you did, how you chose to help even when it was dangerous. He's been talking about becoming a doctor ever since. Said he wants to be someone who saves lives no matter what." Isaiah felt tears building in his eyes. This was how change really happened, not through grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but through individual choices that inspired others to choose differently, to be better, to see possibilities where there had only been barriers. As the teenager was wheeled to surgery, a routine procedure that would heal completely, Isaiah stepped outside into the evening air. The same emergency bay where he'd been handcuffed in anger now bustled with activity, guided by cooperation and mutual respect. His phone rang, Emma Reed, calling to share the news that another hospital system had adopted their anti-corruption protocols. "Emma," he answered, "tell me something. That night, when you were lying on that table, fighting to stay conscious, what kept you going?" Her laugh was soft and warm. "Honestly, the belief that if I could survive, we could transform everything that had gone wrong into something that would protect others. I couldn't save myself by myself, but together, we could save the system." As Isaiah ended the call and prepared to return to his rounds, he realized that Emma Reed had been right. Individual survival wasn't the goal, collective transformation was. They had taken a moment of prejudice and violence and converted it into a force for justice and healing. The emergency bay doors opened, and Daniel Reed emerged with the teenager's family, having walked them through resources for continued care. When he saw Isaiah, his wave carried gratitude that would never fully be expressed in words. 6 months ago, they had been strangers divided by suspicion and circumstance. Tonight, they were partners in something that had grown far beyond their individual stories. A network of healing that would touch lives they would never meet, in ways they would never know. Isaiah looked up at the hospital windows where Emma Reed had once fought for her life and smiled. Sometimes the most important surgeries weren't performed on patients. They were performed on broken systems, damaged relationships, and corrupted institutions. And sometimes, if you were willing to risk everything for what was right, you discovered that healing was possible even in the places where it seemed most impossible. The ambulance bay fell quiet as the evening shift settled into its rhythm. Isaiah Morgan walked back toward the hospital doors, ready to continue the work of saving lives. All of them, one choice at a time. What did this story teach you about the power of choosing courage over comfort, even when the cost seems unbearable? About how justice and mercy can transform not just individuals, but entire systems. Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world around you. Sometimes the most important healings happen not on operating tables, but in the spaces between human hearts where understanding replaces judgment and love conquers the fear that keeps us apart.